Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to have a look at a recent episode of The Trews, which is published on Russell Brand's YouTube channel of the same name. Now I have to admit I know little of Brand himself other than the controversy he caused a while back where he advised young people that it was simply not worth voting in elections. This was back in 2014. Now most reasonable people would, I think, believe this to be acting against the best interests of young people. It certainly caused a storm of condemnation at the time, after which he quickly backpedaled. Having looked at some of the content of his YouTube channel, it soon becomes apparent that he presents himself as some sort of political or philosophical guru. His target audience is primarily young people, and he enjoys a subscription base well over 1 million. But when we examine his content, one thing is striking. His word count is very high, but substantive content is near zero. This, I'm afraid, is usually a good indication of sophistry. And this sophistry is directed at those ill-equipped to analyse it effectively. So, in this video, we'll take a close look at his video, Is Gender Identity Real? We shall examine the type of arguments he uses, the evidence he brings in support of his position, and we will also make some general observations relating to the subject as we proceed. So without further ado, let's look at Is Gender Identity Real?
Welcome to The Trews, I'm Russell Brand, your host. Boy, girl, black, white, man, woman, are these just some words? The answer is yes, but also the words have meanings. That's how language works. I'm on the periphery of fatherhood. I want to make sure that I raise this child to be whoever the hell it wants to be and not impose on it a lot of pink-blue fascism, man. Let's have a look at gender norms.
Well, we didn't get too far into his presentation before we hit the first potential problem. Pink-blue fascism. So let's take an informed view of gender, colour and fashion preferences. Let's start with colour. There is something we need to be mindful of when discussing the pink-blue controversy, and that is, such colour preferences are relatively recent. Gender identification by colour began in the early 20th century. Before this, pink and blue did not hold any gender-specific connotations, and there are many examples of men wearing pink outfits and girls wearing blue. When colour preferences did begin to emerge, just before the 1920s, pink was deemed by many, particularly in published guides, to be more appropriate for boys, and blue for girls, which I need not point out is the exact opposite to the situation we have today. So when and why did this colour preference invert? The preference for blue for boys and pink for girls started around 1940. The reason for this sudden change is unclear, but it appears to be driven by clothing manufacturers simply deciding on pink for girls and blue for boys. It has been suggested that boys simply like blue more and girls prefer pink. But this is a little unconvincing, as people in general seem to prefer blue over pink. But that's another issue. The lesson we take away from this is that colour preferences between gender is primarily driven by fashion and commercial interests rather than any innate gendered preference. Another more interesting point I would like to make is in relation to gender and childhood fashion. This point is often entirely overlooked, and I would like us to consider the now defunct practice of childhood breeching. Here are two old photographs. Which child is a boy and which a girl? Well, that was a trick question because both photographs are of boys. They're dressed in skirts, petticoats and even bloomers, but both children are male. Indeed, the right-hand boy grew up to be President of the United States of America. His name is Theodore Roosevelt. It was common practice for boys to wear dresses until they were round about 8 years old, and this practice continued up to the early 20th century. Russell Brand might consider this imposition some sort of frock fascism, but in reality it was the norm for quite a considerable period of time. Such fashion preferences in both style of dress and colour preferences did not appear to have any significant impact on gender identity at the time. So if it were societal pressures in relation to gender, it does not seem that historically fashion or colour played any significant role.
new Road Rippers. Pump up the volume with the monstrous piston-popping action of the Piston Thumper.
Pump up the fun with the phallic pistony cock engine of your cock engine man machine thing.
Or put the top down and rev it up with Road Rippers convertible.
Pull her top down and that's it, have some fun.
With all their incredible lights and sounds, the fun never ends.
I mean, I think it has got a bit more pronounced and extreme, but thinking about the kind of little boy that I would have been in Grays and Essex, sort of all sensitive and like making a daisy chain, like, not had a clear idea of how I was supposed to be. Having that thrust down my eye holes on the television, I'd have felt really inadequate, I think.
So here, Brand makes his main argument in relation to gendered toy preference by using examples of commercials created to appeal to children. I think the point here is not the fact that when he views adverts for toy trucks, his mind automatically turns to images of thrusting cocks, but rather he uses his own sensitive nature and uncertainty as a small boy as a template which he then uses for all boys and by extension all children. But many boys are simply attracted to toys that are mechanical and find vehicles interesting whether they have thrusting pistons or not. There are many scientific papers that detail gender differences in children. There are differences in cognitive development, mathematical achievement, and relating to play, there are gender differences in motor task performance between girls and boys. Brand makes the argument that boy toys infer agency, while girl toys tend towards objectification and enforce a particular gender role. But research shows that girls have an interest in a wider range of toys than do boys. Girls will play with Lego, but boys tend not to play with dollhouses. So how can we determine gender preference if societal pressure is pervasive? Well, researchers found gendered preferences in very young children and even babies, well before the children are capable of perceiving societal expectations. But perhaps the most definitive studies are the comparative studies of primate toy selection, which we will take a look at next. These comparative studies eliminate societal influences by looking at our closest relatives, the primates. The study we will consider here is the 2009 research by Janice Hazett of the Yerkes National Primate Centre at Emory University. She looked at toy preferences displayed by rhesus monkeys. The researchers wanted to know if these primates would exhibit gender-specific toy preferences similar to those of human children. The researchers were aware that in humans, studies have shown that boys gravitate strongly to stereotypical masculine toys, while girls appear less rigid, spending relatively equal amounts of time playing with boy-favoured toys and with the more traditional feminine toys. The main objective of this study was to test the hypothesis that this gender difference was due to boys facing greater societal discouragement when they play with girl toys than girls do in the reverse situation. The researchers figured that by looking at rhesus monkeys, which don't face comparable pressures to conform to gender roles, they might be able to illuminate biological influences on toy preference. The results closely matched those found in human children. As with human boys, male monkeys clearly preferred wheeled toys over plush toys, interacting significantly more frequently and for longer durations with the wheeled toys, also mirroring human behaviour. Female monkeys were less specialised, playing with both plush and wheeled toys, and not exhibiting significant preferences for one type over the other. The researchers noted that these findings indicated that distinct male and female toy preferences can arise in the absence of socialization, and they hypothesized that there are hormonally organized preferences for specific activities that shape preference for toys that facilitate these activities. So this suggests that children toy preference is largely an unsurprising product of dimorphism, rather than a product of societal pressure. Brand, it seems, is simply putting the cart before the horse. But you're probably wondering about my claim that Brand is guilty of sophistry, All we have at the moment is ill-informed or poor argumentation. Simply being mistaken or wrong about something does not imply sophistry, which is a fair point. But let's see what Brand introduces next in support of his position.
I need some objective analysis of it from a trusted ally, Bill O'Reilly.
The Family Policy Institute of Washington State asked some students at Seattle University about gender.
Which, if you ask me, is a waste of time.
So Brand in this section introduces as his antagonist Bill O'Reilly, the same Bill O'Reilly that believes that science is unable to solve the mystery of the tides. Indeed, tides go in and tides go out, and Brand uses O'Reilly as the foil against which he tests his argument. Not a biologist, a neuroscientist, or evolutionary psychologist, but Bill O'Reilly, who is almost entirely ignorant of biology and certainly not well read in the sciences. And this dire and wholly transparent strategy is what earns Brand the epithet sophist. He has carefully selected someone incapable of rebuffing his position, and thus unjustly makes his argument appear far stronger than it actually is. And this is sophistry.
Really, all you have to do when you sort of watch that is look at those adverts and see that they are sort of clearly attempts at aggressively conditioning. Just the act of purchase is a form of conditioning, and then watch this analysis offered up on Fox News and see that, oh wow, who do you want to identify with? Those sweet young people, their tolerance and compassion, or this somewhat more baldy and aggressive, let's say kindly, more traditional male view as presented on Fox. So I suppose I'll be raising them in the spirit of those enlightened young people. When I say them, I mean Shim, the child thing. That's some true.
So, towards the end of this feast of progressivism, Brand seems incapable of even selecting an appropriate pronoun for his own child, eventually settling for child thing, which is certainly a gender-neutral term, although if one is concerned about potential objectification, I think it best to avoid the use of the term thing when describing your own child. But it's easy to see why Brand might struggle with language and which terms to apply, given the substance of his argument thus far. So we end our adventure at this point. I hope you found something of interest in this video, but as usual I'd like to say a few things. We've seen that gendered colour preferences and even styles of dress have changed considerably over time, with little impact on gender roles. In the same way as tides go in and tides go out, fashion comes and fashion goes. So it seems to me that gendered colour selection and how we dress children is nothing more than a red herring, as is Brand's preoccupation with children's toy preferences and thrusting pistons. The other point I'd like to make is this. Is it the case that gender preferences are dictated by society, or is it the case that society itself is simply a reflection of such preferences? Which to you seems the more likely? Bye for now. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribing. Hope to see you next time.